Hello everyone. I'm making a quick video here to add to the collection that you already have. I just wanted to talk briefly about your essay. Now, you will write two other essays. They'll be part two of each of the exams. The midterm you'll take during week 5, and the final, of course, that comes during the final week of the class when you'll have a short novel to read as well. 8 novels, 8 weeks. And right now you're finishing up and talking about excellent conversation going on about Catching Fire. Week 3 you will read The Hunger Games, and week 4 Corey Doctow's book Little Brother, which by the name was just named one of the 5 most excellent dystopian novels that could come true, including, by the way, the other one that's mentioned in the terms in the area of YA is in fact The Hunger Games. I'm trying to think. Neil Stevenson, I believe, is the author of that. It's one of the links that I found on Facebook. A lot of the science fiction authors I know. At any rate, in addition to that, and over the course of the semester, you want to write about a 3 to 3.5 page essay on the topic of your choice. Now, let me say right now, if you wanted to wait until after the midterm, there are a number of topics that you can write about in the context of the Hunger Games, without a doubt. Just make sure you don't do the same one that you do for the midterm. I'll give you choices over there, and including one of the choices will be an essay over Corey Doctow's gripping novel that I'm going through again now, Little Brother. Now, you can download that from Corey Doctow's Boing Boing. You just look up Little Brother. You can download it as a PDF file if you choose to save some money. All the books, though, are available, I believe, on Kindle, where I have them all for reading. Now, you can also read ahead. If you wanted to read Unwind, for instance, you can, start reading now. The big thing is that if you want a chance to revise, and those of you who have had me in a class know that I love revisions, and so you can elevate your grade. So the earliest you get it in, by the end of the 6th week, for instance, I'll be able to get back to you quickly so that you have an opportunity to revise the work. But do the best job you possibly can the first time around so that you give me an opportunity to give you some solid feedback, as opposed to saying you really don't have an essay here. Now, you'll find, I believe, beginning on week 2, week 3, in there you'll find links to the blog, or on my home page, if you go, to material from the regular children's literature class. Now, if you go to my blog, the class blog page, you'll see you can look at spring 2015, for instance, and click on there, and you'll see a link for classwork. And there, the essays aren't, approximately 2.5 to 3 pages. You want to do a little more, but look there. And you'll see, I think I've mentioned one in particular over the Iron Giant, to give you a vision, a look at what an analysis is, as opposed to, a book report, or how you would use this book in class, and things along those lines. You want not a book report, but a book analysis report, if you will. That is to say, your paper will have a thesis. And it can move in many different directions that I'll get to. And you want to establish what your argument is, if you will, in the first paragraph by making specific assertions. Don't jump in medias res and just start talking. Use the introduction to alert your reader to what it is you think. In other words, reach conclusions, and you make specific assertions about the importance of Katniss' clothing, for instance, um, as a way to discuss important aspects of her character, and in the context of what you see as some of the major ideas in the novel. In other words, you'll describe her clothing. That you want to do more than a description. You want, in fact, to talk about the significance of her father's coat, of the and indeed of the costuming that she will embrace in the third book, when she becomes, if you will, and on her own terms as well, the Mockingjay. Each of the novels poses interesting topics for further development. And now, the way to really start developing your ideas, of course, is through the discussion threads. Get there as early as you can, and then start developing ideas. And if someone says something very interesting, you think, wow, that's cool, then you might develop that further in your own terms, with an essay. Now, the other side of the two, if you want, you're more than willing to post your essay on the discussion thread to get feedback from other students and talk about what it is you think to write about and ask for ideas and things like that. The class is small enough that, we have some very good people in the class that you'll find that people can give you good ideas. Borrow and develop in your own terms. I'd suggest too, for purposes of analysis, independent really of what you're going to write about. Well, let's put it this way. Let's say you decide to write about global warming in the context of Carbon Diaries, 2015. You would look up global warming, some information on the controversies involved there, if you will. But also, you would want to look up things about what dystopian novels do, why they're called dystopian. I mean, dystopia is dysfunctional. It's a Greek prefix. Utopia means really no place, but it's the perfect society. In some of the ways you might talk about at the ending of the Hunger Games might give us a EU-topia, as in Eugene, good genes. EU would mean then a better place, but not a perfect place. At any rate, look up these things, and then perhaps you can find a way to use what you've read by way of supporting your ideas. You'll find in the essay, for instance, over the Iron Giant, and there's also another excellent one over Walt Disney, I believe, alphabet book. In those essays, the students are asked to use references from the Norton Anthology's critical introductions to the various aspects of children's literature, from alphabet books, for instance, fairy tales, and in fact, science fiction and fantasy. We don't have that, so don't worry about it. But the idea I want to get in there is, when you write your essay, you have a specific agenda. And that's going to help you determine what you're not going to write about. And if you make an assertion about a character, the way that you support it is by reference to the text. Now, you can describe something, or you can use quotations. And before you use quotations, Google using quotations. Do not, for instance, let a quotation hang between sentences without an introduction. You use quotations to support what you have to say, not to tell us what the author has to say, which would be more in the line of just giving a plot summary as opposed to an analysis. An analysis allows you to talk about the plot in convincing, persuasive ways, whereas just retelling the story doesn't do much more than say, I read this book. And reading the book is the starting place, if you will. So look at the other essays as you move along. Um, yeah. One of the other things is, a lot of people just rake Wikipedia over the coals, which is a simplistic way of looking at Wikipedia. Clearly, Wikipedia has some errors, and you want to be careful. But Wikipedia is a good place to go for general information, and also something that's even better is references. So if you go down to the end of the Wikipedia page, let's say about circuses and bread, panem and circuses, it's a juvenile's Roman poet who criticized the fact that the Romans had given up their freedom for the comfort of, discipline, if you will, and the way that the people are placated is by entertainment and food, which goes on, by the way, in capital. If you look up that one and you go down, you'll find references that take you to other parts of the poem where he says, "Who's watching the watchman?" And if you've read Watchmen, you know this is another quotation from Juvenal. You'll find interesting things there that you might be able to use to support what you have to say. So once you make up your mind about what you're going to write about, then you can go and look up things. Because now you've narrowed your focus to something in particular, as in abuse of technology or technology used for control, the overreach of security, those kinds of things, and you'll be able to make connections with contemporary society, which you'll find happens in a big way in our next book, Little Brother, which, by the way, is a play on Big Brother, but it is a YA novel with a 16-year-old, so Little Brother. Contemporary connections, you know, they're important and they can be part of your argument. That you have a host of different things to write about in this class. It is dystopian novels. They are YA, so get familiar with just what dystopia can do. And part of it is, for instance, in the Hunger Games, if you read about Collins, she doesn't give many talks or anything like that, but part of the inspiration for the book was her father was involved, as was mine, and my friends, and I got lucky, who were over in Vietnam, but you had the television coverage of Vietnam, but mostly people just, with the Iraq War in particular, watched reality shows, and weren't really up on what goes on in the news and things along that line, and she saw that as dangerous, or sees this as dangerous. And then you can see that in the Hunger Games, perhaps, is that if you're willing to get up your freedom for the comfort of security or discipline, there are some important things to consider. And in our next novel, you'll see, was written before the Snowden's revelations, however you feel about that, but there are concerns there. And a good argument goes on, and you can see how that would find reference in the Hunger Games, for instance, where people have in the capital in particular no freedoms, and then in the other areas, of course, they also have no freedom, except they know it and are reminded of it constantly. You can have the situation of security. Global corporate corruption you'll find to be a part of, for instance, the Carbon Diaries, ecological abuse, which brings about, by the way, in many respects, what goes on in the Hunger Games, but in particular in Carbon 15, the final novel of the series, the abuse of science and technology. You're going to find it Unwind, for instance, which is at face value, it looks like it's about abortion, but it's about much more, as we'll see. You can go through and look at all these different a character analysis is not a description, but if you pick someone like PETA, for instance, yeah, PETA's name is bread. I mean, and things along those lines. But you'd want to talk about him, but you're not just going to describe him. You're going to describe him for a purpose, and that purpose has to do with some of the main or central concerns that you see in the novel, and also their relationship with things that go on in the world around us. Don't ever forget that connection, because that's what science fiction does. And you're reading science fiction um, all term long. Uh, Science fiction, and this is a thing to remember when you're looking at the various topics to go from. Unlike fantasy, if you want a horse to fly in fantasy, you can. You have to keep the audience engaged, and in its own way, fantasy is not so much of escape as a way to confront the world around you. In order to figure out in order to figure out what's going on in Alice in Wonderland, has to reference everything to the world above the whole to make things make sense. So, in a sense, when you're reading a fantasy, a sophisticated fantasy, it reconstitutes reality, but it doesn't make you have to believe that it's scientifically, intellectually possible. Science fiction must. Science fiction wants you to believe in the possibility of this actually happening. And so you have to have a lot of references to contemporary society. You can think of a dystopia as taking problems from today and putting them in the future, not necessarily to forecast what's going on, but, as Ray Bradbury said, to stop the future from happening. Um, and you'll find in all the novels these possibilities. But one of the big things is making you appreciate the reality of the possibility, the verisimilitude, if you will. Um, and that's why science fiction is a literature of ideas, but also of contemporary concerns, anxiety and tensions. And the novels we're reading are very popular right now, dystopian fiction, something new in the area of YA, and read by adults galore, turned into huge movies. Um, that has to do with the fact that they have to confirm reality. You have to make people see there's a possibility of this happening in the future. So, Neil Shusterman's book Unwind, there's been a homeland civil war over abortion, pro-life versus um, choice, and there's a compromise put into place that makes nobody happy. And what happened though is that it makes all abortions illegal, except between 13 and 18 you can post abort a child, and they're unwound. And unwinding is the taking apart and the selling of every part of the human body, made possible, and here's the big thing, scientifically, by a process that makes rejection, does away with rejection. So there's a possibility of it. There's a lot of research going on in that area, and then he uses these two, politically, the often angry opposition over abortion, and then the scientific thing that goes on. So it's based upon very strong possibilities. They're only going to read one book, in fact, that takes place in outer space, and that is The Knife of Never Letting Go. And one of the things we find there that's huge has to do with the significance of an alien. The fact that there are also aliens who land on the planet is important as well. But another big area there has to do with gender roles. And you find that in the Hunger Games, and basically in many of the books that we read that looks at these important distinctions, social, if you will, even biological. So you have the question of security, ecology, um, and really one of the big things is this ambivalence over technology. It depends how it's used. And I'm often in discussions about the science fiction and, of course, this idea of dual use technologies. This is going on right now in our world with our attempts and in conjunction with many other nations to make it so that Iran does not develop a nuclear weapon. And this has to do with the enrichment of uranium. Now, you enrich uranium to a certain point to make it so you're using it for, let's say, power in a reactor or for medical purposes. But once you get to that stage, it's very easy to move in another direction, which is armaments. And so this is these dual use technologies. They can be used for good or to harm, and you'll find that used in virtually all the novels that we read. And these apprehensions hit us after the Second World War with the bomb and the altering role of science and things along those lines that you find science fiction as a rule after the 50s started to be tinged with a lot of anxiety in these areas of how technology is used and abused. In fact, I believe the Greek root we have for pharmacy is a place where we go to get medicines to make us better. Um, but also, those medicines can be used to poison. So, pharmacos can either be a poison or a cure. I often think of snake bite in that same way. But most of the technologies to make us secure, for instance, have this double tinge. And I always ask the questions, how much, in many respects in the United States, how much of your personal freedom are you willing to give up? As I've said before, for the comfort of security and discipline. Um, you'll find the dangers, too, of technology in Cory Doctorow's book of the abuse, in this term, Homeland Security. Um, they passed the Patriot Law 2, and that's been a huge, by the fight over this. Um, with various politicians, if you follow the news, they're talking about just what you're reading about. Now, like I say, I'm telling you, we have Unwind, we have The Knife of Never Letting Go, and Something Island we'll visit to, and the Carbon Diaries in our 8 books. They all fit into these areas I've been talking about. Technology, media is related to technology, but you can narrow your focus even more. Especially the Hunger Games gives you a perfect example how media can be abused, if you will, by in this sense that is making people believe they need more security, and then pumping things up, and every time something goes wrong, to run in there and take a chance to increase, let's say, the level of control. For instance, in District 12, um, after uh, after I think it's after the Victory Tour, we find that it's before the Victory Tour because she has the scar. We see as a form of punishment, everything gets closed down, and then when it reopens, everything's even more restricted. Wages are less, hours are longer, and working in these dangerous coal mines. And we have the new people come in, and Darius is no longer around. He's turned into one of the tongueless people, Avox, excuse me, no voice. Vox, vocus, vocal cords is a Latin word, again, like bread, and panem, so that they take advantage of the crisis and then put in further restraints, and all in the under the banner of security. And, of course, capital always has to remind them why security is necessary. You'll see this argument brought up over and over. Gender roles I mentioned. These are these idea. Remember, science fiction is an idea literature. Science fiction was talking about the problems of clones before one was ever done with the sheep. For instance, propaganda and control, food, very important, especially control of things along those lines, as everybody's sitting around waiting to I'm trying to remember the name of the movie where people Soylent Green. In fact, humans are even used for food in that movie, and you'll have references to it in various manifestations in these novels. Now, yeah, and then corporate power, of course, and also government abuse. In many ways, capital is a corporation instead of a government. We call it an integrated uh, corporation. It's that they own the means of production and everything else, which makes it a good possibility, unless, as someone wrote, you had some really pissed off adolescents that would go and change everything that you had done. In our novels, too, remember that the protagonists are going to be young people um, whose eyes are opened to the truth around them, if you will, and they have to overcome uh, those obstacles. This is really big time in, let's say, The Knife of Never Letting Go, where the boy um, believes until he's forced to change, which is very difficult. As the eyes get open to the world around them. It's the same thing that happens to us, if you will, in revealing contemporary problems and looking at them intellectually, scientifically, analytically, which is exactly what you want to do in your papers. Now, when you're writing your papers, I can make a list for you. Uh, Look at the words, look at the organization. Yeah, you need a good introduction and a strong conclusion. If you don't have a strong introduction that lays out exactly what you're going to do, which you can change as you start to write, um, you're going to wander, and it'll end up being summary as opposed to analysis. You know, the significance of gender in the Hunger Games, the importance of um, security in the Hunger Games, or the significance of. Keep that word significance in there. And instead of a thesis statement, think in terms of assertions. An assertion is a statement that you make. And you say what is important about capital in terms of control. You know, list some things, right? And then you'll make a certain assertions about why the food is in what, why, this or that. I don't care how you do it. But each of your paragraphs will respond to that original assertion. So you're always pointing back to where you started from. And you can make sure that you move logically between paragraphs. As you go from point to point, you'll show how they're related, which will provide a nice continuity to the essay. Look too at your word choices. I would go through, because I will, and go and circle all the is's and r's, the were and the was. If you have more than 2 or 3 in a paragraph, change things around and use, active verbs. Active, just strong verbs that really also describe, as I like to say, when you're exhausted, you don't walk into the living room and sit in the chair. You drag your feet across the carpet and collapse in the chair. These are good, strong verbs that help create emphatic prose. And keep that in mind as well. I'll let you know about errors and things like that to help you improve them. So read carefully my comments. I hate to say it, sometimes I think it'd take longer to read your papers than some people actually put into the writing. By which I mean do more than one draft of your writing. Start early, build up ideas, share thoughts with the discussion threads every week you can. You have a specific book to read, but there's no reason you can't start talking about your papers. And again, get them in before week, but by the end of week 6. afterwards you're not going to have a chance to revise, and I'll accept the revisions until, like, the last day. um, I won't be here during the end of a class. I'm going to spend 3 weeks in Costa Rica, uh, beginning 19 July, where I'll be taking an immersion Spanish class to help me, because I'll be teaching a introductory conversational Spanish class in the fall. But I will have internet at the school. There'll be no trouble. And I can download everything. I can grade them after school. I can do all kinds of things. It's not going to make that big of a difference. So if you have questions, you email me, and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible. I want everybody to do a good job on the essays. Again, you can revise them and elevate your grade, but um, the best thing is to give your strong effort on the first draft, and that way I can help you. Okay, I'll look forward to hearing from everybody.